Morning guys, Sunday morning, welcome back to the shed. I've done a priming video last week, just discussing really what colours of G shade you should put under what colours of paint, and I thought today I'd have a little chat over primers. It's a very underestimated part of a paint job. Most guys get in a panic and in a hurry to put a coat of paint on. But as you're well aware, the sort of foundation of every paint job is your prep. Doesn't matter how good a paint you are, how good your products are, how good your painting equipment is. If you've done a poor job priming, prepping, panel straightening, whatever, the job will still look rubbish. Doesn't matter what you've done. I think the easiest thing to say is there's lots of different types of primers out there, dozens of different primers out there, different makes, different purposes. We just need to find out what primer we should use at what part of the repair. And it's quite a simple thing to think of really, but for some reason people just think there's one big tin of primer and slap it on and that's it. But you're giving yourself a hard time. What I always do is have a look at the panel you're about to paint. So let's say for instance I'm looking at a bare metal fender, a wing. What do I need to do to that fender to paint it? Obviously I've got to prime it, so I'm looking at bare metal. My first line of thought now is, how is my paint going to stick to that wing, to that fender? And it doesn't matter whether it's aluminium, whether it's steel, it's totally irrelevant. The paint is the same thing. Bare steel, I'm looking at getting the paint to stick a few different ways. Yes, I can put a scratch in it. So this is going to give me my mechanical bond. There's two types of elements that paint sticks to a part. One's called chemical bond, one's called mechanical bond. The scratch, the roughness that you put in a panel, is your mechanical bond. So yes, you can use a P80, P180, whatever, scratch up your bare metal. That's giving you your mechanical bond. Etch primer is probably your first line of defence. With etch primer, excuse me, got a bit of a cough. With etch primer, back in the day, years ago, we used to do something for security on our windscreens of cars and side windows and whatever. We used to have a little packet of alphabet and numerical stickers. We'd stick them into the registration number, or tag number as you Americans guys say, onto the windows, and then you'd have a little tiny bottle of acid etch, and this acid etch you would put on the glass over your stickers, pull your stickers off, and you're left with the registration of the car. That glass now has an etched appearance, so it's rough. If you run your fingers over it, you can feel all the letters quite distinctly. That is basically the same as putting etch primer onto a panel. If you put etch primer onto the panel, if you looked at it under a microscope, it would make it rough. It would give more roughness to the panel, so there's more mechanical area for a paint to bond to it. So it's going to stick. So this acid element is creating a mechanical bond, but also a chemical bond because the acid burns into the panel. So bare metal, first line of defence, etch primer. You could opt for missing that stage out. There's pros and cons for both ways. A good quality epoxy primer. You can paint an epoxy primer direct to metal on top of a scratch is obviously best because you've still got an added adhesion sort of element. So yes, you can put your epoxy primer over the top of that. So that's now got my first layers of paint stuck to my bare panel. So that's where I need to be. Now if I'm looking at a painted panel, and this could also include a new panel that's got an E-coat on it, Do I need to sand down an E-coat? Technically no. You can just put etch primers, epoxy primers, whatever, straight on top of the primer, on top of the E-coat. Glasurit make a fantastic primer, a 285, straight on there. The only thing I will add, and in my experience of 40 years doing bodywork, E-coats, whoever put them on, E-coats, you can have runs, bubbles, all sorts of sediments, all sorts of horrid bits in the surface. So would you trust the guy who's done your E-coat to say that that coat is fine, I can now just prime it? I don't. If you start off with putting a light scratch in with either a softback sponge or a scotch pad, that will tell you as you're sanding that panel down, is the E-coat good enough to paint on? And I mean this from, like I said, from runs, from solvent popping, blisters, sausages on the edges of the paint where they put it onto. It's that reason why we're rubbing it down. We're rubbing it down to see whether it's good enough to paint, rather than rubbing it down to make the primer stick. So I always sand mine down to start with. If you break through, go to bare metal. Yes, you can etch, and you can put a high build on the top if you want to. I prefer to use a wash primer first, because that covers the etch element as well as a coat of paint. So new panel then, E-coat, rub it down. I would use etch or a wash primer. Because the panel hasn't got any repairs on it, you could go straight to a wet on wet primer, sprayed with your standard Top Gun finish gun, like a 1.4 nozzle or something, so you can paint your wet on wet, then you can paint. So once again, that's addressed all the elements that we need to for E-coat. Now it starts to get a little bit more complicated. We have further steps to do now. If you have, I'll say a wing for all these examples because it's easier to talk about. Now you've got a painted wing that's now got a dent, and you're going to repair the dent. Sand all the wing all over so that you've now created a mechanical bond on the old paintwork. You've established that all that old paintwork is good. You're now doing your filling and repairs, so you've obviously broken through in certain places, so you've now got bare metal. You've also got fillers that now you're trying to match the level of your filler to the old paint. So first protocol is address the bare metal. So you need your etch to do the bare metal. You can use an epoxy primer that you can paint. You put epoxy primer still on top of your body fillers. That's great. It works as a brilliant sealer. Then there's a couple of different ways to go. Dependent on how good your repair is. If you've done a fantastic repair and all you're now trying to do is take out the scratch of your rubbing down materials, this is what we use our high build primers for. High build primers, the 2K primers, they're not meant to be part of the repair. They're not meant to get dents out, they're not meant to get big sink marks out, they're not meant to build up your last millimetre of your finish. That's not what they're meant for. All your dent should have been filled, should have been glazed, it should be straight. Then you go to your high build. Your high build is only meant to take the scratch out of your repair. So we're talking about possibly finished with a 180, 240. It will take out those scratches perfectly with no sinkage. If you're trying to build up layer and layer and layer of high build primer, it will sink back. We've seen the examples on YouTube of an over mix of primer, and they leave it in a pot. It's called puck. That puck will shrink back, shrink back, shrink back, and that's what's happening to your repair. So these high build primers are meant to fill your scratch, nothing else. If your repair isn't quite good enough and you're still thinking to yourself, do I put some more glaze or stopper on to get it flat? You have another advantage or another way to go. You can use the 2-pack polyester primers. These primers are designed to be extremely thick. It's quite okay to build up like a millimetre of paint or whatever with these primers, just keep lapsing it on. It's basically a cross between body filler and your glaze, but sprayable. So if your repairs aren't very good, if your lines aren't sharp enough, if you've over sanded and you've taken the sharpness of your lines, your styling lines out of the panel, put your polyester 2-pack primer on next. Keep building that up. It goes on atrocious. You've got to put it through a great big cannon of a gun, a 2.5mm nozzle, but you can keep building it up, building it up. Respect your flash off time, still the same as with any painting, but you can keep building it up, building it up, building it up, and it looks like a horrible concrete wall. The finish on it is horrible. You cannot spray it properly out of the gun. It's rough, but it sands down as sweet as anything. It sands down really, really chalky. So now you've corrected your repair by your polyester primer. Because I've just said this polyester primer finishes very, very chalky, and it literally is like a stick of chalk. That's not good enough to paint on, because your paint will be absorbed into that chalkiness. So you now need to seal the surface. So you can go two ways. You can put your high build primer, 2-pack, straight on top, all over. That sealed the surface, that's fine. Or you can go your epoxy. You can put your epoxy on top of that, which has sealed the surface. All fine. It's not a problem either way. So that's your choice. You can do that either way. But now, with either your 2-pack or your epoxy, you have now sealed the whole surface, and that's what we're looking for really. We are looking for one type of material to paint onto. If you do spot repairs on any repair anywhere on a car, obviously, you've got old paint, old lacquer, primering materials. So when you put your paint onto those mixture of substrates, as we call them, the paint responds differently to every single substrate. It's a different chemical, a different finish. Some substrate materials soften when more paint's put on, some go slimy. There's all sorts of reasons why they react differently. Some are more pervious than others, so your paint will draw in and sink back, so this is why sometimes you can see things sunk. So by creating one complete primered surface in one material only, when you put your paint on, your paint can only respond to that substrate one way. So that gives you an element of uniformity over the whole panel, so it will stay the same. And that's what we're looking for really. That most paint jobs, you've seen them being done on YouTube, as I'm going to put this on YouTube. They'll do weeks and weeks of repairs, flatting, getting the panels flat, getting the lines sharp, whatever. And you put it into the booth and you think, oh, they're going to paint it now, and they don't. They seal it. They use something like, most of the Americans are using like this K36, a PPG product, which seals the surface all over. You spray it on at the same consistency of your top coat. If you're going to do a single layer top coat or single stage, you just mix it up to your 16 to 19 seconds viscosity, stick it on through the same spray gun nozzle setup as you would your top coat. You can't treat it as a primer. You have to treat it as a sealer. You have to treat it as a top coat, and they seal the whole car. And that way, when they put the paint on, everything respectively reacts exactly to the same as what the paint you're putting on. And that's what you're looking for consistency over the whole item. Not little bits that's been repaired perfect, because you've, like I said before, you've got primer, you've got top coat, you've got base coat, whatever. So you need a complete sealed surface to do the best repair. So I think that's covered most of what I was going to talk about. As I say, there's lots of different primers out there. People do get confused on which ones to use. And yes, for one job, there is never going to be just one tin of primer. That's the primer for the job. It doesn't work like that. Yes, you've got options of you can have tins in bulk, in 1 litres or 5 litre tins, and you have to put the paint on in a spray gun. You can also buy those materials, spot priming materials for if you've had any cut throughs and you're just going into the booth and you just want to just paint over a little cut through on a wheel arch or a little styling line. They offer you the same materials, or basically the same materials, in like an aerosol or rattle can, so you can just, and that's it, leave it for 5 seconds or so and then crack on. The only thing I've sort of missed out of the talk about priming, and I've probably said this before in a few of my other videos, I've sort of gone away from single stage priming. It's still very popular. I would say 99% of body shops still use it. For me, every time I've ever gone and used a single stage, just touched in a little mark, something that's frying up, whatever, it's just horrible. The solvents in a single stage or a cellulose type primer is just so strong. It creates more problems than it's worth, really. With today's paints that's on the cars, we've got a lot of water-based base coats. There is polyester base coats. Whatever type of base coat you're using, if you've broken through the surface and you try and touch in with a single stage primer, you've either got to put the primer on so dry that there's no solvent in what you're putting on that's going to pickle up an area. The problem with that is, without any solvents and without the paint being wet, it hasn't stuck to anything. It's just lay on the surface. So when you get that car now out into a hot summer's day or a cold winter, when all these paints are expanding and contracting at all different levels, if you've lost adhesion because you've had to put single stage primer on so dry that it's not really stuck there, it's just sat on the surface, I can guarantee that repair is going to show through. With all these type of like rub throughs, it takes seconds to mix up a tiny bit of 2-pack. Yes, you can stick some catalyst in it to send it off. You can stick a bit of rocket, as we call it over here, some accelerated hardener, just so that within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it's gone off.